Joining me is the country's top foreign affairs writer, Greg Sheridan, the Australian newspaper. Greg, you must be delighted because you've called for years for more and longer range missiles. Now you have them. You're a happy chappy, aren't you?
Well, Andrew, you're always so positive and I'm always so negative. And I hate to be the skunk at the party again. But, you know, I'm glad Albo and his senior ministers took on the left and defeated them on the arguments in principle. They made magnificent arguments, they made them well, and my applause for them is not ironic or grudging. However, they continued to do almost nothing. We're not going to build these Tomahawks. The government was intentionally, I think, ambiguous in its words today, and it's very, very misleading. We're hoping that sometime later this decade we'll build what are called GMLRS, which are very, very short-range rockets fired by army artillery for land warfare against other armies. So if we're having a land battle in Western Queensland and the Chinese army is within 70 kilometres of us, we might be able to fire a few of these GMLR rockets, which might even be made in Australia, who knows. But the Tomahawks, it's great to get them. I'm in favour of Tomahawks. No one loves Tomahawks more than me. But we have in the entire Australian Navy precisely 3 ships which can be fitted for Tomahawks, the air warfare destroyers. Now, they will need to be modified to take the Tomahawks, but they can be fitted for Tomahawks. With the rule of 3 in any Navy, you've got to have 3 ships to deploy 1. The air warfare destroyers only have 48 missile launch cells, whereas modern destroyers normally have 100, or the Korean missile destroyers have 120 or 140. Of those 48, you need quite a lot to defend the ship against incoming missiles and to defend any ships it's travelling with. So at the most, you might carry 6 or 10 Tomahawks. Maybe if you really load everything up, you might carry 15. So on our most ferocious day, we will be able to deploy 1 ship, precisely 1 ship, with maybe 10 or 12 Tomahawk missiles on it. Now, I am sure that in the leadership compound in Zhongnanhai in Beijing, they are quaking in terror at this development.
That is just an extraordinary fact, Greg. They need to know where that 1 ship is and then neutralise the threat. I mean, it's just staggering. Now, the other thing that really surprised me, Greg, it's bizarre to me that the Labor conference says no to nuclear reactors to power our factories and our homes, but it says yes to a dozen reactors, albeit smaller, but 8 reactors, in fact, to power our 8 nuclear submarines that are coming. Even though the advantages are exactly the same, you know, nuclear power, reliable, to go on and on, you don't need to go up for air, no gassy emissions. Why the difference?
Well, you're absolutely right, Andrew. I mean, this whole box and dice just is completely incoherent. And, you know, I would actually be modestly critical of the whole Australian media for failing to impose any serious rigour on any element of this debate at all. I mean, the big reason we only have 1 ship that can fire Tomahawks is because the government has decided not to build any new ships for the next 10 years. But on nuclear, you're absolutely right. So if you think nuclear technology is inherently unsafe and inherently wicked and so on, you would have to think that's much more so if you have it in a combat ship travelling at, you know, 10s of 20s of knots an hour all over the planet, berthed in an Australian city, you know, either in Perth or probably in Port Kembla in Eastern Australia, right in the centre of the harbour. Much more things can go wrong with a nuclear reactor in those circumstances than could go wrong with one peacefully on shore. But it reminds me of Labor's old policy when, to win a South Australian election, it had to say you could have the Roxby uranium mines. So they had that weird policy, that 2 mines policy, where you had good uranium and bad uranium. The good uranium was in South Australia, so the South Australian Labor government could get re-elected, and the bad uranium was everywhere else, where eventually, of course, they got rid of that policy and they embraced uranium. Well, eventually they'll get rid of this idiotic anti-nuclear policy and they'll embrace nuclear energy. But meanwhile, Australia's development has to be retarded by 10 or 20 or 30 years, so that unlike the other 86 countries or whatever it is that have nuclear energy, and, you know, Pat Conroy, whom I like and admire, says this is going to be the most advanced manufacturing in the world. Well, what absolute baloney that is. I mean, when we're manufacturing a nuclear submarine, our grandchildren will be pushing up daisies. But in the meantime, we're going to be the only country in the world that doesn't have a nuclear industry, but does manufacture and maintain nuclear submarines. It's none of this is real, Andrew. There's a pantomime quality to Australian politics.
You're so right. But Greg, you forgot one other thing about these nuclear reactors in a submarine versus the one safely on shore, is that the one in the submarine's actually got a target painted on it. Put a missile here, please, China, you know. I mean, seriously. But that's fine. That's fine.